Okay. What book are you reading?
We're live.
Did you make the squash?
She's been very busy.
Been a
It's
bit.
sitting in our kitchen, waiting to be done.
Bad week.
Probably this week. I almost did, because I was so tired today.
He got his hair cut, he can't hear it.
In what book? Your son's gonna be for that one too, right?
Round block.
No. Okay, you knew. You haven't
So
say,
as
I'll
soon
go
as they
to the
finish
one,
cutting,
you knew.
they take off. And they don't do the leaves and
All
leaves.
right.
And she calls her from Scotia. So she had them neighbor, two neighbors. They had the big recycling bin filled, like 25 bags. If you have lunch, like my groceries, you give us one free, and then they'll come and do your, my brother-in-law has the one, and he works till December to clean it.
That's what's back when we were doing that, when we were doing our original. Yeah. They donated songbooks, so they all say he's like, they're songbooks before these songbooks came along.
Oh, okay. That little girl, she's kind of crazy.
Which one? The little one. He had the little one today.
It's 6 o'clock, so I guess that means it's time to get started. I was gonna maybe wait a minute or something to see if everybody quieted down. It's funny, when I started the live stream, everybody got really quiet. And then it ramped up again, so, but then everybody got loud again.
But you didn't start talking.
No, I didn't. I was just trying to make sure everything was set up and going. But you know, it's 6 o'clock, but man, it feels like it's midnight, as dark as it is. I'm not a fan of the dark this early, but it's going to get darker even earlier. All right, so Dad is down there trying to tell people we're not in the book of Joshua, even though the screen says we're clearly in Joshua, and we've been in Joshua for quite some time, except for those couple of weeks that Glenn was teaching us on love. What chapter are we in tonight?
6.
All right, so chapter 6. So Joshua chapter 1,
Chuck's in 3. I don't know where we're.
Chuck's in 3.
I'm a little behind.
Because wrong lesson.
That would be a multiple of 6, right? Is that the math term? All right, so chapter 1, Joshua takes over the leadership of the Israelites after Moses died. You read about that at the end of the Pentateuch there, of the Torah. Chapter 2, Joshua sends some spies to which city?
Jerk.
All right, and how many spies did he send?
2.
All right, he sent 2 there. When the spies came back to Joshua, did they give him a good report of the anybody remember? Did they give him a good report?
Yes.
Yeah, they were optimistic. They said, God has given us the land because the people are terrified. So they were pretty confident. But those spies, whose house did they go into? Because we read about her again tonight, don't we, in this chapter. So they go into the city, or go into the house of Rahab. The king there in Jericho knew something was up. Something wasn't right. These Israelites are getting closer. Did Rahab want to die? She knew that something was going to happen. So she didn't want to die. And she was given some specific instructions. Her and her family, if they wanted to survive, she needed to do something. Put that scarlet cord out the window when the battle was about to start. And stay inside there, yep. So then after that, there's a little bit of a reprieve, right, in the narrative here in Joshua. not talking really about Jericho yet. The Israelites still hadn't crossed over the Jordan River, but they were making their preparation, weren't they? So chapters 3 and 4, right, the Jordan River played an important part in those particular chapters. And if you remember, we made the quote from Burton Kaufman. He described it as being a terrible river. And terrible, not that it's mean, it was just a pretty treacherous area. It was rocky, slimy, all kinds of vegetation growing up along the banks. It was winding. Did it flood?
Yes.
Yeah, it would flood from the
Flood at the time.
flood, and because of the snow melting off the mountains around it, rushing into that. So when it flooded quite a bit. So in chapter 3, Israel had been given some directions, commands about crossing over the Jordan River. And then they crossed over, but chapter 4 was a little bit of a deeper telling of the crossing over, because there we learned that there were some special instructions concerning some stones. Anybody remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Put
they
some
were-
stones in the river, and then they put some stones up on the bank.
Yeah, so what was the point of those stones?
So people would know.
All right, to represent the 12 tribes. So they were memorial stones so that people could remember. And in fact, they were told, later generations are going to come back and go, what's up with these stones? And then they would be able to tell the story. After they crossed over, do you remember the area that they set up their base of operations at? Gilgal. If I remember right, the name Gilgal means hilly or rolling, something to that effect. But so that's important to remember, because they'll go out to war and then they'll come back to Gilgal. All right, so chapter 5 that's where we were at last week, right? Kind of interesting. Something strange happened before they attacked Jericho. What was that strange thing that they were told to do?
Had to be circumcised.
All right, so I know English translations say the second circumcision, but it's just referring to the second generation of Israelites being circumcised. Apparently they didn't do that when they were out there wandering in the wilderness. Now it was time to be circumcised. Did that show great faith on their part?
Yes, because they were in view of the cities that their enemies were in.
And so circumcision is an operation, isn't it? And
Recovery
And typically that's done to infants, and so they can recover faster. These were grown adult males of various ages, but you have some older males. Some of the warriors would have been circumcised. And when you're recovering from a surgery, do you feel like going to war?
No.
Not exactly. So it's a good thing, right? We've already read descriptions about how the people in that area, they were very afraid. They were like paralyzed with fear. So it's a good thing that they had that kind of fear, because that gave the Israelite men and the warriors time to recuperate before they went into war. And then Joshua met a man. Who was the man that Joshua met?
Jesus.
All right. So it describes him as having a weapon, doesn't it? A sword in his hand. Why would you have a sword in your hand?
Because you're gonna use it to kill somebody or chop something up.
So you're,
Represents a soldier or a warrior.
if a warrior has their sword in hand, it's not in its sheath, right? It's out. He's ready for war.
But this thing was drawn.
Yeah, it was drawn. It was out. It was ready. It's almost like when you have a weapon. I don't know, Glenn can fact check me on this. Glenn, if you have a gun, like let's say you have a concealed carry, right? If you have a gun, if you pull it out, it's got to be a pretty serious situation, right? And you don't ever put your finger on the trigger unless you are ready to shoot. So, I mean, that's kind of the same concept here. This guy has his sword drawn. He is ready for war. Joshua discovers that this man was not just a regular angel. Have you ever pointed out this would be Christ taking on a human form? Yes, a very fancy word. It's a human manifestation of Christ. There's other theophanies in the Bible. We know that this was not a regular angel because Joshua fell down and did something.
He worshipped him.
he worshipped
This
him.
man did
And
not
this-
stop him,
right.
so.
And the man did not stop him. And we looked
An
at,
angel would have.
an angel would have, and we looked at that example from Revelation 22, verses 8 and 9, where Peter fell down to worship an angel. And the angel's like, no, don't do that. Right? I'm not God. I'm just another messenger, just like anybody else. And there is a New Testament scripture, Colossians 2, verse 18. It says, don't worship angels.
What was that, Colossians 1?
Colossians 2, verse 18. Do people worship angels today?
Oh, yes, they do.
I mean, it seems like there's some people out there that do. Are there any magazines written in regards to we came across in Ohio, I don't even know if it's still published or not, but there was like an angel magazine, and everything was about angels, and you read all these stories about angels,
I was
and
given a ton of them for my grandma.
okay.
She.
It's kind of elevating angels, isn't it? And they're just created beings. I mean, they're higher than us because they're spiritual beings, but they're not God.
It's always bothered me too when people say when somebody passes on, they're like, oh, now my angel.
Yeah, that's
They were not
No,
recreated.
angels are angels and people are people.
Yeah, they're not recreated after death, so.
people are people. That reminds me of an 80s song. Anyway, all right, so tonight we're going to be in. What's that?
She said, why should she?
Why should we? Chapter 6, before we get flagged from YouTube for some sort of copyright. All right, chapter 6. Now we've been talking about Jericho, right? A lot. Fresh in people's minds. We're finally getting to the battle there in the city of Jericho. Do you think this battle required some faith as well?
Yes.
It's
Especially when they hear what they have to do.
this war was not going to be done in a traditional sense of a military.
Yeah, to fight this city, walk around in a circle.
This was not traditional. It was very. So I will say this. I wrote this later down on in my notes, but I might as well just address this now. Nowhere do you ever see in Joshua the people complaining or questioning or arguing with Joshua. You know, they just, hey, priest, carry stones. Get 12 men from the tribes, carry stones, large stones, right? Large enough to be able to withstand floods, obviously, and big enough that people could see it as a memorial. Nobody questioned, nobody complained, nobody argued. Now, I wanted to mention that because years ago, well, let me just say this. Your theology probably shouldn't be based on VeggieTale cartoons because I just wanted to refresh my memory, and I watched a few minutes of I kind of ended up skipping through. I was like, anyway. But they had at one scene, they had the people like grumbling and complaining to Joshua, like, we should have went back to Egypt. And I'm like, well, they did that with Moses, but we did not see that here in Joshua. And then, in fact, this video, this little, their interpretation of it, that's when they had Joshua leave because he's like, he was frustrated. So he got up and he left the camp. And that's when, according to VeggieTales, he came across the warrior with the, Jesus, the Christophany. But we didn't see that. That's nowhere in there. So anyway, yeah, don't base your theology or your beliefs, please, on VeggieTales. All right, so Joshua chapter 6. We're going to break this up in, what do we have, like 4 sections here? I think it's 4. All right, so we're going to start in Joshua 6, verses 1 through 7. The Bible says, now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king, and the mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all you men of war. You shall go all around the city once. This you shall do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of rams' horns before the ark. But the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow the trumpets. It shall come to pass when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, that all the people shall shout with a great shout. Then the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up every man straight before him. Then Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said to the people, proceed and march around the city, and let him who is armed advanced before the ark of the Lord. All right, so pause right there. Question number 1, why was Jericho shut up?
So the children of Israel.
All right, verse 1. All right, everybody agree with Vera? Is that correct? Okay. Young People's Table, you agree with that? Yeah. All right, trying to get you guys interactive here. All right, don't want to exclude you. All right, so because of the children of Israel, but what about the
They were afraid of them. They knew they were there somewhere, and they
Right.
were afraid.
All right.
So many of them.
Yeah, and they all crossed, right? So it wasn't like just a regiment of a few thousand soldiers crossed the Jordan. No, they all crossed over, and they could see. We said that the city of Jericho to Gilgal was approximately a mile away. So if you're up on these city walls,
You could see.
you'd be able to see them.
And then you're
And-
reporting to all the people down below, like, you won't believe what they're doing.
There's over 1 million people.
Yeah, about 1 million people. Could have been more.
What does it take to walk across a river?
They probably had people standing there watching this, like dumbfounded, like, what are they doing? Because this is a fortified city, so I'm sure that there have been other wars in the area, and they probably, some of the guys on top of the city walls and the outpost would have been warriors, and they probably were probably confused and afraid because they saw 1 million plus people crossing a river. And I don't know exactly the terrain there, but do you think if there was 1 million people plus that were a mile away, Hazel Park's what, 4x4? Is that what so imagine you're standing on John R., right? And 1 million people came down and they started converging down on DeQuinder. Do you think you would be able to hear them, or you would know something's going on down there? Because 1 million people they're going to generate some sounds, right? So they knew, they were afraid, right? So they shut the city up. What does that mean?
They're not letting anybody
Nobody's
go.
going in, nobody's going
It's all
out.
secured now.
Yeah, they were on lockdown, weren't they? The gates were closed up. So that is extra fortification. I did read a thing about the city of Jericho was unique because it had double walls. You had an
Yeah,
exterior
this is-
wall and then
Who was it that did that lesson here? Was it, I don't know, a few years ago? They did like a whole map of the structure of how Jericho was, and it was double wall.
that double wall,
You
and
had
those walls
exterior
were
walls,
thick.
You had like farms and whatever, and then you had an interior wall that was taller than that. Yeah.
And they were super thick. So to read, what happens here later on is just, it had to be a miracle. Although, before we read it, I will say this: if you're reading secular stuff, they'll try to say, well, it was an earthquake.
I think because all them people kept going around and around and around, it weakened the foundation.
It could have been part of God's plan to do that. Yeah, very well could have. So question number 2, and it's cool if you summarize it because there's a lot of writing with this one. What was the battle plan given to Joshua by the Lord?
See verse 3 through 5.
They,
Okay,
they-
I almost did that.
Almost.
I wrote, I
Okay,
paraphrased, but I did do it later
No,
on.
I wrote it all out.
So,
right.
so did it even.
All right. Who wants to answer it other than see verses 3 through 5? It's okay if you, I guess. Y'all know my feelings on the C verses 3 through
March
5.
around once for 6 days.
Okay, march around.
7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns.
Okay.
7th day, march around 7 times, and priests blow trumpets. Then all shout a great shout and go straight forward.
Okay. And what would happen to the walls?
Fall
would
flat.
They'd fall flat. And I know there's been people that we've tried to theorize, does that mean they went bloop? Does that mean they went bloop? I don't know. Can't things just crumble?
Does it
And
really matter?
it don't matter.
It went-
The
it
walls
went
came
up.
down.
Yeah.
All right. So you think, so,
You look
okay.
at the 2 towers in New York and they.
Well, see, I was going to say that, but I was going to try to be a little bit more tactful on that. I say, if you look at a building being demolished,
Yeah.
and we see giant buildings, they blow it up and then they fall flat, doesn't it? That's the appearance of it anyway. So, I don't know, don't need to really get caught up on how the walls fell. We just know they did fall, or they were going to.
Enough
This
for
was
them to march over them.
this was the command, right? So this was the battle plan given to Joshua by the Lord. That's the way the Lord wanted it done. All right, so question number 3. Who was to lead the way before the ark of the Lord?
Seven priests
with
bearing
seven
seven
trumpets
trumpets of ram's horn.
Verse 4.
All right, verse 4.
Six.
Verse 6.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's,
Well, you got it in
It's
verse
in
4 and
verse
in
four.
verse 6.
yeah,
I thought this was gonna be a trick
Verse
question.
4, and 7 priests shall bear 7
Italicized
trumpets of
words.
ram's horns before the ark.
Because in verse 7,
I put verse 6. All right, so that's interesting. That actually, when I first answered it, that's what I wrote. But I wrote it underneath, let him who is armed advance before the ark of the Lord, verse 7. I wrote that, and then I was re-looking at it. I was like, wait a minute. And then, so then I wrote verse 6. So did anybody else put 7? Did you put?
I know on
Yeah.
mine I did, because
Did you?
I put both the priests, because the
Yeah.
priests were ahead of the ark,
Yeah.
but the armed men were technically ahead of the priests.
They technically were. So this is what's going on. So we have some, we,
And 7.
Yeah, Black Catherine got that one too, because I
Yeah.
called Alona and then we answered. And I'm
I
like,
have 3 different
Did I read
answers
it wrong?
for this.
so you got a third one. What's the third answer?
Well, I first wrote verse 2, and then I put 7 priests, and then I scribbled that out.
Okay.
Then I put Joshua and the mighty men of valor, but then when I was reading on, I go, wait a minute, no.
I
Then
got
I put
it.
7 priests, and then when I got here tonight, I looked and I saw the exact verbiage of.
The italicized
Who
words.
is before the ark of the Lord, mighty men who are armed.
So this might be a lesson to all of us. Maybe we should just all start using pencil to answer our questions.
Yeah,
because you should see my paper that's currently sitting at home, it's like got their cross off and
yeah.
like scribble this one.
You can always get an extra copy if you need to. Although I've done that, but actually I have some crossed off stuff here, and I'm like, I am not rewriting this. So anyway, it makes it for a mess. But so either way, so we do see some exact details though given, right,
Yeah.
on how this is going to be, how they're going to be arranged going into this war.
Wasn't there supposed to be like a set, wasn't it supposed to be like 2,000 feet from the ark that everybody was supposed to stay away from? Did that apply in this case?
Like I don't remember. I'd have to look more into
For the
that.
priests
So
of the period, they had to, everybody would maintain a,
it would seem like here that they were all kind of together.
Yeah,
Like it didn't
yeah.
keep, but maybe having the priest being there kind of around it was a buffer.
Yeah, because when they cross the river, it specifically said.
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, to keep that
It's
space.
kind of weird that they didn't mention it again.
Yeah. So here we have a regiment of armed men going in the front. We have the 7 priests with horns, and then we have the Ark of the Covenant. And then you're going to have more people behind that. All right. Didn't try to trick anybody there, but sometimes it happens to.
well, you could have
bet.
fooled us.
Wow. Y'all just think I'm a trickster or something like Question number 4 is going to be a trick question. Just kidding. All right, so the next section we have here, verses 8 through 14. Starting verse 8, it says, So it was when Joshua had spoken to the people that the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord advanced and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets. Now Joshua had commanded the people, saying, You shall not shout or make any noise with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, Shout. Then you shall shout. So he had the ark of the Lord circle the city, going around it once. Then they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. Again, that's back to Gilgal. So can you imagine that? I just to pause there for a second. So they march about a mile plus, to go march around the city, to march back. You had to
How big
be.
was the city?
We're not for sure. I've Googled that. I thought that was pretty interesting thought. I'm
'Cause I was
thinking,
thinking about that, like how much walking was that really?
I think some people estimated on the last day it would have been about 3 miles march all the way around on the last day. So obviously that would be 7 times. So not a huge city, but still a lot of walking
You just think
involved,
for
right?
A city that fortified,
Yeah,
I think it was
smaller
like a
cities would
larger
be easier
city,
to-
but you know.
easier to protect
Yeah.
as opposed to a bigger city.
Still had to be in good shape to be able to to do this kind of, and they're coming off of an operation. So keep that in mind. So in verse 12, and Joshua rose up early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. Then 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew with the trumpets. And the armed men went before them, but the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets. And the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did 6 days. All right, so question number 4. What else had Joshua commanded the people?
Not to make a peep.
Okay, not
That's
to,
gotta be freaky, huh?
not,
You know, those people just walking around your city not
Silent
saying anything.
and that was verse number 10. It doesn't really say peep. Must be from the message.
Not what noise was to proceed from their mouth or
Yeah,
spoken with
not a
silence.
sound.
Now I wonder what
Until the
the
day that he shouts.
now I wonder what the message says. Does it say? Does it use
probably says the
that? Don't make a peep.
Take a look.
We know what you're
But
studying.
but yeah, I put that in my notes. Well, so they were given detailed instructions, right, in how to walk, or what not to do, as they were marching around. And I'm glad that I wasn't the only one to think that. Catherine, you're the one, right, that mentioned how creepy that would be if you saw all these people.
Not saying anything?
Especially when you're already afraid of them and you were hearing all these things. You just watched them cross this river. It was noisy.
And then you watch these creepy movies, right? And then all of a sudden there's a sound that happens, and what's it make you do, Chloe? Right? Those
Not
are
so much as a whisper is
what?
what it said.
Yeah, not so much as a whisper, a peep. Man, I'm surprised they didn't use the peep sound there. Or word. So jump scares, right? Can you imagine? Imagine they're all walking around quiet, and then trumpets blow. I mean, don't you think there's some jump scares going on there?
Yeah.
The people, I'm sure they were really on edge. You're a warrior. You're in the city. You're watching these people march around your city in absolute
love it.
silence.
Nothing.
Well, I wonder what's going on in their mind.
Yeah,
And then they leave.
walk back to their camp, and then they go and do it again the next day, and the next day you're thinking, okay, so surely today's gotta be the day.
Something's going to
right?
happen. You're
Or
right.
maybe they were yelling, like, what are you doing?
Maybe. They could have been taunting them from the top of the wall.
What? They were throwing slushies.
They were throwing slushies at them and other objects, according to VeggieTales. Don't do that.
But by the 7th day, then you're like,
Well, they
oh,
figured something out was different on the 7th day, right?
Yeah.
When, all right, so question number 5. Well, what did the Israelites do for 6 days?
Walk around the city once and return to camp, just as they were commanded.
So you could have summed this one up, right? Verses 12 through 14. They did exactly as they were instructed to do. Nobody deviated from the instructions.
12 to 14,
Verses 12 through 14. That's so
13 and 14.
close enough.
You know,
Why'd you put Chuck? They,
Put 2 words.
I mean, it's like all of our words were here.
For
We
which-
have
for-
like
for which
one
question?
word answer.
for number 5,
They were quiet and they marched.
they did as they were instructed to do so, right?
And all he writes is quiet/marched.
Well, Chuck and I had this conversation
And
earlier.
here we
Yeah,
go.
yeah. Well, I feel with class I got to be a little bit more verbose.
so I was thinking, you said earlier, you know, how they followed what Joshua was telling them. And I was thinking about back to Moses and like the difference between these 2 leaders, where with Moses, they complained a lot. Or with Joshua, they're just doing what Joshua says. And I really feel like it was because Joshua was much more confident in his leading abilities, because remember,
Yes.
Moses was like, send somebody else.
Yes.
And I don't want to do this. They're not going to listen to me, and I'm going to need
And
this.
Moses was
And he
older
needed.
too, Joshua was younger.
Yeah.
So that's
So-
even a plus too, because usually old people don't listen to young people.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a great point.
And he
So-
might have said it in a nicer way too.
No, I mean, we don't know.
If
but-
somebody tells me to do something and they're ugly about it, I'm probably not gonna do what they want me to do.
Well, I think they had respect for Joshua.
Yeah.
They'd already knew him. He was already a warrior. He'd
Yeah.
already been helping Moses in the leadership. Something else that would help Joshua have the confidence was God said, hey, don't worry, I'm with you. And then not only that, but he had some leaders from the 3 tribes, right? Tell them,
Yes.
hey, be strong, be courageous. God's with you.
Well, they also saw all their ancestors not make it to the promised land because they were complaining, and Moses was leading, and he didn't.
It's about time they
So
started
maybe
paying
they
attention.
paid attention to it.
I'm like,
Oh, we've
oh,
been.
even Moses
Yeah.
had to follow the rules.
Yeah, yeah. And Joshua had to follow the rules too. Israelites, they're going to learn that lesson though, aren't they? Next chapter, and we'll talk about that next week. So here you have, but everybody had a job to do, and everybody had a part to play, and everybody did it. Priests carried the ark, priests with the horns. You had the armed men in the front of the ark. You had armed men in behind the ark. They marched around once per day for 6 days. No complaining, no questioning, no undermining authority. They just did it. And I just pointed out again in my notes that there's nowhere in the biblical text does it give any indication that anybody questioned or complained. Any other thoughts, comments, questions on this section? All right, so starting in verse 15, we'll go verse 15 through 21. Chapter 6 says, "But it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early about the dawning of the day and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. On that day only they marched around the city 7 times. And the 7th time it happened when the priest blew the trumpets that Joshua said to the people, 'Shout, for the Lord has given you the city.' Now the city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction, it and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all who are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. And you by all means abstain from the accursed things, lest you become accursed when you take of the accursed things, and make the camp of Israel a curse and trouble it. But all the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are consecrated to the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord.' So the people shouted when the priests blew the trumpets, and it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout that the wall fell down flat. Then the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword." Question number 6, when did the Israelites rise up on the 7th day, and how many times did they march around the city?
It rose up about dawn.
Okay,
7 times.
all right, so they
15.
verse 15. All right, so they rose up early. What was your answer? What was your short answer, Chuck?
I forgot to answer the second part.
Oh.
I forgot to answer the first part.
Oh, you balanced each other
Together
out.
we match.
Yes, yes. So they rose up early at dawn, which would give them enough time to go from Gilgal,
People to march around
yeah,
the city.
and to get to the city, to march around it 7 times, and then to be able to destroy it. So yes, they marched around 7 times. Question number 7: who were the only ones to live that day, and why?
Rahab and those in her house, because they had hid the messengers.
All right.
She had hid the messengers.
All right, so the messengers would be
The 2 spies.
the 2 spies. And what verse did you find that in? 17, all right. Or 17b? Anybody put the B?
No.
I didn't this time.
You didn't this time.
Because I actually forgot to answer the second part of that question.
All right. 17b, right, the latter part of verse 17. I think it's pretty interesting that this is kind of, there's a fancy term. A fancy term called synecdoche. It means part for the whole. This is kind of a part for the whole of what she did, right? Did she do more than just hide the spies, the messengers?
Yes.
She actually told a lie for them.
She told some false truths to help protect them. She helped them escape. She kept.
They probably fed them while they were there.
She kept it from the people. She says, "Oh, they went one way, and they were actually up on the roof, hiding underneath some was it thatch that they flax, yeah, the flax for the roof." So it's all inclusive here when it says she hid the messengers. She also had to agree to not tell anybody after the fact. and she had to put the cord in the window, and she had to be where during the battle? In her house. So her and everybody in her house needed to be in the door.
All the important people of her family to make sure they were there with her.
We don't know, but maybe there was some family that didn't make it in there.
Right.
You think about Lot, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Well, yeah, because
And some
she wasn't
stayed
able
behind.
to tell them why they were coming there. She just was like, "You gotta come."
Yeah, can you imagine trying to convince people
You're right.
to? Yeah, she
Because if
had
she
a.
had been telling them, who's to say they wouldn't have told, and
Yeah.
then that wasn't really obeying what she was
Yeah.
told to do. So
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting, you know, this is cross-referenced in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 11, verse 30 and 31. So she was faithful, and there's also mention there of the spies. So I think, you know, we don't usually talk about the spies there in Hebrews chapter 11, but they were faithful too, weren't they? They were not named, but, you know, they were faithful in going to the city, coming back, giving that report to Joshua.
So I think it's interesting that, I mean, it's toward the end of the chapter, but that they dropped the family off at the outskirts, but it says she remains with Israel to this day. So she went with them, but the family, they just dropped them at the, outside of the city.
And she went on to be part of Jesus's
Yeah.
lineage, so.
But they promised
Yeah,
they,
yeah, they would
God
save
would
them.
save them, but
So you
they
were,
had to stay here.
as you were saying that, I was trying to register what I wrote in my notes here. But that phrase there at the latter part of verse 17, that she hid the messengers that we sent, there would be another clue that the writer was an eyewitness of these events. You know, we talked a little bit about that last week. Question number 8, what specific things were they to abstain from?
Accursed things,
Verse
18.
All right. What would happen if they took the accursed things?
Would be utterly destroyed.
Well, they would
Okay.
become accursed, and
Oh,
then if they go
yeah.
to the camp where
Come on
Israelites
to the
were, then
next
it would
question.
make control for them.
It-
Israel would be cursed.
Was he talking about like the idols and things that the people of Jericho had?
Well, it would be all the items that God said to destroy. Like if they were to take any of those items, they would be accursed. And apparently, that would include the silver and the gold vessels of bronze, the vessels of bronze and iron, because those things were to be special, weren't they?
Well, that's what I had taken,
They were
anything that was
consecrated
to
to the
be
Lord.
used
Yeah.
as an offering.
Yes, those things were consecrated. What does it mean to be something? If something's consecrated,
Set aside.
right, it's holy, it's special, it's set apart. This was going to be devoted to the Lord. In verse number, anybody remember?
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. I didn't ask for the chapter number. Hello. Verse 19. Verse 19. All right. So here's an incident where they are supposed to go and destroy everything except for the silver, the gold, the vessels of bronze, the vessels of iron. Those things were to go to the treasury of the Lord. This would be a type of first fruits. So later on, in different wars, they're able to go in and take all the spoils, everything. But in this particular incident, God says, you give this to me first. Isn't that what we're supposed to give to the Lord? So do we struggle with that in our day and age? I've said this before. If we think about, we should not give leftovers. That's kind of the way we would say it today, right? We shouldn't give God leftovers. But what happens today when you get paid? Do you give God first out of your paycheck? Actually, who gets first dib out of your paycheck?
The government.
Yeah, your great uncle, Uncle Sam, and
Ain't that great?
and then your great
You get the leftovers.
and then-
You get, like,
and then you get your
leftovers.
great aunt in Lansing. I don't know. I just made that up. So they, government gets the first dibs at your check, and sometimes people will sit down and then they'll say, okay, well now DTE gets a chunk, and all the other bill places they get a chunk, and then we got to eat, and then you got to have gas, and then by the time all's said and done, you're like, oh, here you go, God. It's just whatever's left over. And sadly, God doesn't.
My last two.
God doesn't want the leftovers. He wants the best from us. So that's a type here, right? This is a type of first fruits. They're coming in. This is the first war. The spoils go to God. Question number 9, what happened to the inhabitants of Jericho?
Utterly
All
destroyed.
completely destroyed with the edge of the sword.
Even animals.
All right, verse 21. So yeah, men, women, young, old, ox, sheep, donkey. You know, I'm sure there's people probably thinking, man, these are perfectly good animals. You know, but that was the command of God, to destroy them. This sounds pretty rough, doesn't it? Now, commentators have said, thankfully, we're not given the bloody details. This obviously was tremendously bloody. But all Joshua says here is that they fell by the edge of the sword.
That's pretty bloody.
Pretty bloody, but it's short and sweet. Now, if Hollywood were to dramatize it, you might see people with ninja swords. Anyway, and it would have been far more gruesome for Hollywood to portray. Joshua just kept it short and sweet. Right? He didn't want the gruesome details in here, but we know it was gruesome. Now, do we struggle with that sometimes, reading passages such as this? Kaufman says in his commentary, and I kind of shorten it up here a little bit. If you want to know further thoughts, you can go look Kaufman up at chapter 6, this particular section. But he says the moral cancer of Canaan was at this point in time out of control, and there was no other recourse available to terminate the wicked debaucheries and immoralities of a people running wild, unrestrained, and utter rebellion against the Creator. Now, they'd been given time. They had time. Now, did God ever punish the Israelite people for their rampant debaucheries and wickedness? Absolutely.
God's patient, but he will reap judgment on people.
So sometimes people forget that. They just want to make the Israelites out as being bad and wicked for doing this.
And God too.
And God too.
He'd be a loving God if he told them to kill people.
God was a loving God because he told them the right way. And you remember Romans chapter 1, where God turned the people over and just said, he just allowed them to continue in their wickedness. That's who the Gentiles were. That's what Paul was referring to. It just got worse and worse and worse until judgment came upon them. And this was God's divine judgment. So, all right, any other thoughts, questions, comments?
Well, I was gonna say, like, with that kind of a judgment, he's setting an example. It had to be a really powerful example so that the nations around would know that, hey, listen, this is my judgment on these people. Don't do this because I don't want to have to do this again. It's kind of like when you're correcting your child and you're like, don't do that. And then you're like a little bit more forceful. And then finally they get whooped. And it's like, I'm whooping you hard enough because I don't want to have to do it again.
I mean, don't you think these other nations could have, or these other groups of people, tribes, whatever, however you want to describe them, couldn't they have changed?
Yes.
Or they could have repented, and God gave them plenty of time.
No matter how strong you think your walls are.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe this might even be a type or a foreshadowing of the final judgment? The
Yes.
final judgment
Yeah.
that God's going to have on all humanity? That, you know, the wicked, you know, just, it's, people forget, I think, sometimes that God is pure and he's righteous and he's holy and he can't have that in his presence. So it has to be eliminated. All right. So question number 10 is going to come from the last section here, verses 22 through 27. But Joshua had said to the 2 men who had spied out the country, go into the harlot's house, and from there bring out the woman and all that she has, as you swore to her. And the young men who had been spies went in, brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all that she had. So they brought out all of her relatives and left them outside the camp of Israel. But they burned the city and all that was in it with fire. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua spared Rahab the harlot, her father's household, and all that she had. So she dwells in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Then Joshua charged them at the time, saying, Cursed be the man before the Lord who rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay its foundation with its firstborn, and with his youngest he shall set up its gates. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout all the country. So, real quick, I don't know if they necessarily left Rahab's family behind. I took it as they pulled them out and they kind of left them off the side while they're going in and destroying things. And they were Gentile people, so they would have to be purified and all that good Jewish stuff before they could intermingle with them.
And also said, who belonged to her besides her family.
Yeah.
So her servants and all that, so there probably.
So there's probably other people, yeah, a good portion. But I'd have to think, dig into that a little bit deeper, I guess. All right, question number 10. What curse was charged to them at this time?
See number 26.
Which
Cursed be the man
says,
who rises up and rebuilds the city.
Okay.
His firstborn will be the foundation, and his youngest shall set up its gates.
all right, so there was a curse on a man if he were to rise up and rebuild the city, and there would be a price to pay if it was rebuilt. In other words, if it was rebuilt up into a
Like a
fortified
city, yeah.
type of city.
Because we know later on it is rebuilt.
Well, we do know later on
Like
that the
this.
book of Joshua talks about them dwelling in
Yeah.
Jericho. Probably just like if a
Well,
city,
it's like a city, not like a fortified city.
yeah, but probably like the region of where Jericho used to stand, kind of in that area. Now, we do know that the city was even rebuilt later on. So the curse was to the rebuilder. Okay, the curse was on the rebuilder, not necessarily the inhabitants. And I have an example from 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 18 through 22, where Elisha, the prophet, was actually in the city of Jericho, and the men of the city of Jericho had come to Elisha and says, hey, the water's bad and no food can grow here. And Elisha did a miracle and corrected those things for him, fixed those things. So, but was the city of Jericho rebuilt as a city of fortification or a stronger city? Actually, 1 Kings 16 verse 34 tells us that there was a man who rebuilt the city. 1634. Could somebody read that for us? It's pretty interesting to read. 1 Corinthians 16:34. You read it. 1 Kings?
That's what you said.
1 Kings.
Okay, I'm like, wait a minute. now. Make a-
Sorry, I don't know. What did I say?
You said First Kings
Okay.
16:34.
You just said Corinthians.
Sorry. 1 Kings. 1 Kings. What?
The
First King.
the second king.
Yeah.
The second, the other one was, yeah. All right, 1 Kings 16:34.
In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundations with Abiram his firstborn, and with his youngest son, Segub, he set up its gates, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through Joshua the son of Nun.
So, paid the price for reestablishing this particular city. All right, bonus time. I feel like Alexa. Anyway, all right. So, bonus question: what kind of trumpets did the priest use? Okay, ram's horns. That's what trumpets of ram's horns. Is that a restaurant around the area? But it, yeah, it's been a while since I've. Did you say what? What? It's
Ram truck.
yeah, and they have a horn. Anyway, it just gets cornier and cornier. All right. Did anybody put down the verses that you found this answer?
4, 6, 8, and 13.
Ooh, 13. Did I write that down wrong?
I got 4 and 6.
I did. I wrote 12, but yeah, it's 13. What'd you get, Laura?
Oh, I have it up.
She said 4 and 6.
4 and 6. So I also put in parentheses, maybe verse 5, kind of a question mark, because it says ram's horns when you hear the sound of the trumpet. So
So it really was a trick question.
4, 5,
That was a trick.
8.
well, the bonus question could be a little tricky. All right, so I did want to mention this real quick before we end this. Did you notice how this chapter ended, verse 27? So who was with Joshua?
The Lord,
Why was the Lord with Joshua?
because he's obedient.
Because he was obedient. And his fame spread throughout all the country, right? What does it mean by his fame?
Reputation.
His reputation. So people heard, people knew, the fear was going to be we would say today his reputation preceded him, right?
They're all going there.
Yeah. All right, very good. Any other thoughts, questions, comments?
Can't wait
Concerns?
for the next chapter.
The next chapter, yeah, they learn a hard lesson, don't they, the Israelites? But we're going to talk about that, though, too. I think it's kind of interesting. Looks like class might turn into art class, but anyway. Anyway, young people, what can you do? All right, so
When it says it laid the foundation with his firstborn, that means when he built the foundation, they killed his son?
I'm thinking they died. They paid the price. The firstborn died, and the
Whoever rebuilds, they're gonna
And
pay
when
the
they
price of the
gave the
firstborn and
Yeah.
the lastborn.
and then the oldest and the youngest
He
both
must not
died.
have cared,
So when
or
you
not
started,
believed.
Or he didn't know, or he was ignorant when he did
Right,
it.
I mean, he could be at that point.
Could
I
have,
don't know.
but God put the curse there, and He says this was going to happen, and did it happen?
He did
It
So it
happened.
happened.
God says, don't take the accursed thing, or something bad's going to happen. Keep that in mind.
Things happen.
Keep that in mind for next week. You're going to be going home going, what happened? What happened? It's like, cliffhangers. All right. Thanks, guys. It's been an enjoyable class.
Thank you.
It's been a good class, thank you.
Mr. Glenn, I asked what you were doing in 45 minutes. I guess it's been 50. Are you still willing to do the closing prayer? All right. Thank you.
Great and kind Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day and the niceness of the weather. We thank you very much for this class and pray that everything we did was right in your sight and glorifying you. I'm very thankful for Ryan and his efforts here as he teaches us, and he does a very good job of doing it. We're very appreciative of that. Pray that you be with the congregation and all the efforts we do in your name. We pray, Lord, that you please be with all the sick of our number. Help them as needed, and pray that the time may come when they can come back and be with us again. Pray, Lord, that you forgive us now for our sins. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Amen. All right. Thank you. Bye.
So I put that.
Keith Taylor.